This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the Exators. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Она образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, the skin's beautiful.
Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Exators. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Exators.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.
How are you, my friend?
Always exciting to see you. Today's show is brought to us by the Russian Illuminati, the letter Q, and viewers like you. Thank you, America. No, I'm kind of kidding. This has been a fun week. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and all of a sudden, Leo's out with a new book this month. We were talking about it not too long ago. You were in the process of finishing it, and you just had finished your last one, 10. This is the 11th. I'm a big fan of the number 11, just generally. It's kind of a nice, magical, wish-making number. So I'm pretty excited about this one. And you've got a lot of things going on with the East Asia connection, which is it's pressing. This is all pressing stuff. But just thank you for being here. Why don't you introduce what you've been working on? How you been, Leo?
Well, I'm definitely not King Louis. In any case, I have been working, as you know, since we last spoke, on completing this new book, which I thought it had a certain sense of urgency, especially after the 13th of July and the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump. You just showed an article, one of my recent articles on Zagami.com, which is based, of course, on my new book. Here it is. You can get it for around $15. Still on sale since Labor Day. I wanted to help out people who are in difficulty because today, with this economic situation of uncertainty, it's always good to get a book and grab it for a few bucks rather than over 20. And so I think that this also will help spreading the truth about a subject of great importance today, which is mind control. I mean, when it comes down to what you revealed just a moment ago when you showed this article, my book is based, of course, on a timeline, the history of mind control, but also the future of mind control. And in this case, what you're showing is really the future of mind control, because right at the start of July, basically 1 week before the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump, they announced that finally they were capable of doing something that was only dreamed of before and might bring to a new level of conformity and mind control once it's, of course, inflicted upon all of us as a human species.
What a wonderful medical advancement, Leo.
Well, yeah, they always talk about wonderful medical advancements. Even the BCI, the brain-computer interface, will be brought to you always as a kind of medical advancement to help the needy who are paralyzed, those who have lost this or that and incapable of walking any longer, and all these things. Of course, everything seems reasonable, but it's also Trojan horse, so they can enter in your body. We know that one of the afflictions of this age will be eventually transhumanism. The need for the New World Order to implant something in us and make us dependable on the AI is ever so present in our reality. And like I said, just a week before Trump's assassination attempt, they announced from the Basic Science Institute in South Korea, the Institute of Basic Science, this new invention called NanoMind. NanoMind would have been the dream of Satanist Michael Aquino, who recently went to another form of life, probably in hell. But I was very close to Michael Aquino because we talked many times about the Monte Carlo Lodge. And in the Monte Carlo Lodge, I used to have a regular correspondence with Michael Aquino, who we even invited to the Principality of Monaco. Of course, people was always focused on Dr. Michael's, and he used to like to be called Dr. Michael Aquino.
And the accusations against him, particularly
which of course are very reasonable and probably true. I mean, I always found him a creepy guy. What happened in the 80s with the Presidio case was probably in the end dismissed by the military authorities because they, of course, needed Aquino. Aquino was a pioneer in the science of psychological warfare.
My only concern is that anybody who looks that weird already, like, I don't know. Maybe he was evil, but if you're that evil, don't you have a normal haircut?
The most weird thing is that in the last few years of his life, he even managed to arrive and become the head of the Campbell clan in Scotland and nominated a baron. That's a bit of an insult because I'm a member of the Campbell family. My mother is Jessica Lyon Campbell Zagami, and so to have actually him as the head of the clan was something that I found pretty odd.
But you know, because Campbell and Camel and the connections to the Scotch and the Botswana Africa thing. So like that's the Scottish rite back to primordial Shriner culture. He made that's like Little Town Boy makes it big. You know, you got to be like, congratulations, Michael.
I think that he probably gave a lot of money to
I imagine so.
You see, the thing is that while in England the actual titles are locked in to the nomination, which is given by, of course, the Queen or the King or whoever is in charge in the kingdom. In Scotland, they seem to have a way of maybe giving these titles also outside of the classic aristocratic setup and family. So I wouldn't be surprised that Michael Aquino actually even paid or had some kind of knowledge about getting this title maybe through his own connections in military intelligence, past connections, because he had retired just before the invasion of Iraq. And then, like I explained in my book, he actually was very pleased when he published in November 2003 the second edition of his very controversial essay, which he initially published in 1980, and this essay was characterized by a new and more sophisticated and less, let's say that he was not really a proponent of MK Ultra. He had been a fairly, people always say Michael Aquino, MK Ultra, no, but in reality, he was very critical of MK Ultra because he had elaborated this work called From Psyop to Mindward, the Psychology of Victory, with, by the way, at the time, coroner Paul E. Balelli, which then we saw more recently as a Fox News opinionist of sorts, with Michael Aquino, at the time major and, of course, part of the headquarters of the 7th Psychological Operation Group in San Francisco, because at that time it was based in San Francisco. I think since then they have moved to another town here in California. They elaborated this new doctrine for psychological operations, which, like I said, after the invasion of Iraq, he was rather pleased to say they had put in action this whole doctrine. Now, what happens is that MK Ultra ended in 1973. As you know, it emerged, publicly speaking, in 1975. That was the moment in which MK Ultra became almost like gradually. I would say that it was almost like a big scapegoat for the moment, because nothing came out of that scandal, nothing came out of the committee, and
it's like there's nothing in this hand. There's nothing in this hand. Well, you've got something in the other hand, right?
First of all, what happened was that in 1973, the then head of the CIA had conveniently destroyed every evidence of all the various sub-projects of MK Ultra, which included, of course, also the very inconvenient sub-project 68 of Dr. Cameron in Canada, who, of course, then suffered a lot of not only of criticism, but also of attempts to get money, because the Canadians were not really happy with what happened back in those days. And of course, you're showing now sub-project 68, which was a awful way of experimenting.
But you know, the Canadians were so polite about it. So
the Canadians are always proud about it. In fact, in this book, I also show the latest PSYOP, which was actually conducted. And here we have to go very carefully, because we are broadcasting, of course, on YouTube, and there is still very fierce rules regarding the pandemic. But there is ample evidence of a documentation issued by the Army of Canada, which conducted a full-on investigation, I think inspired by the Ottawa Citizen publication in Canada that investigated the whole thing, and came with the conclusion that during the initial phases of the pandemic, until they were exposed really, they exercised an enormous amount of propaganda and influence on the Canadian people, unwillingly participant to a massive experiment of mind control. But if you want to know more, of course, you can go on this book and you can and you can know more about it. I mean, when it comes to Canada, Canada is really a mind control laboratory of the New World Order. I don't want to, people.
We love Canada. We love Canada here. We love Canadian people, but. Yes, it's true. The state of Canada, which makes its own media, which is it's a proliferation machine. As a child, I grew up in America, in like Hollywood, watching Canadian TV. There's so few Canadians, and that they're able to put out this image of what Canada is. We've done shows on Camp X, the James Bond training and inventions of spy equipment camp. This is a base in Canada, right? Because the British controlled the base in Canada. So yeah, we can all agree that Canadian people are great, but there's more going on to Canada, very clearly.
I think the main problem with Canada is they never had 76, so they never really had real freedom, because if you are under the British Empire and later on the Commonwealth of the British Empire, and you are basically always under the king and queens of England, you are not capable of distancing yourself and having.
You can't be your own culture. And this is also the other thing, is they have a Royal British Ministry of Canadian Heritage and Cultural Affairs, which has a prescriptive culture and say what they think Canada should be, what they think Canadian people should be like, and what they think people should not be like. Now, if that's not mind control, I don't know what is. That's the whole idea. You tell people how to behave.
Yeah, that's really sad. And it's sad the fact that somebody native of Scotland, and we go back to Scotland. I'm actually myself part Scottish, so I mean.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a Fitzgerald myself, yeah.
And actually still have family, and I'm connected to Scotland.
It's true. Canada is run by in a lot of ways. Canada is kind of controlled by the Scotch Freemasons, right? I mean,
well, that is another thing, because if you start talking about Scottish Freemasonry, you have to understand Scottish Freemasonry is not per se the right Scottish. It was brought there by Chevalier Ramsay during the time in which there was this inner fight within the British kingdom on who had to conduct the empire, if they would go, and the kingdom, if they were going back or not to the Stuarts and Catholicism, or if they will embrace, like it happened, the Hanoverians that then became the Windsors and stay Protestant. And all this happened in the 1730s when Chevalier Ramsay was actually the tutor of Bonnie Prince Charles. But this is something that is not inherent to what we're discussing today. However, Dr. Evan Cameron was a distinctive man with a distinctive resume from Scotland, who had moved to Canada early in his career, had been a psychiatrist that was actually asked to evaluate Rudolf Hess in 1945 to see if it was fit to trial at Nuremberg. So, I mean, this guy didn't come with any, he wanted money for his own research. But I tell you one thing about Subproject 68 within the MK Ultra subprojects. He would have probably conducted a project on his own without the CIA. Or he was obsessed with these kind of experiments, which he called deep dive, and which, of course, infringed in the rights of these patients that were completely brainwashed and made to do things, and it was terrible, the level of conditioning. Now, in my book, I explain from chapter 1 how the first experiments in conditioning came from the Soviet Union, from Dr. Ivan Pavlov, who started to experiment with his dogs. Later on, of course, with people, once he came into a deal with Vladimir Lenin, who wanted to mind control and persuade his Soviet population. Now, when it comes to Dr. Cameron, we can say that he's a little bit trying to follow on the experiments of Pavlov, and also knowing that those Pavlov's experiments became the norm in Russia and also in China, because China was profoundly inspired. And when it came to the war in Korea, the Korean War, that was the moment in which MK Ultra was born inside and outside the United States. Outside of the United States, in Canada, Great Britain, but it was also a great way to have Cameron working in Canada, because you could always use the clause of plausible deniability. And in fact, to this day, also this mass class injunction to get some money out of, they didn't really get that much, because the Canadian laws always try to bypass the problem by saying retroactively they couldn't condemn foreign, because it was a foreign initiative by the CIA in Canadian territory. However, I think that Canada, unfortunately, has a big problem, which is conformity and compliance.
And they have a love for psychological operations, right?
And they seem to have a love. Now, when it came to Dr. Cameron in Montreal, he became a friend of Alan Dulles, who would become later the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, the first civilian director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And he offered to treat Dulles' wife, Clover, according to Gordon Thomas. So there was also a personal, private connection between Dulles and Cameron in Montreal. Since Cameron had a reputation for being very good with treating women's psychological complaints, let's say that was the kind of thing. And even John Marks in his excellent The Search for the Manchurian Candidate gives Cameron the benefit of a doubt when it comes to whether or not the Scottish-born physician knew that his projects were receiving CIA funding. I personally don't give him that kind of doubt. I think that John Marks was being a little bit diplomatic there, or probably at the time when he wrote that book, he was still a bit scared of making such an assertion. I can make it, I'm not scared. The guy died a long time ago, and I think that at this point we can say the truth about what happened. Also because that clinic that he built up with all these crazy experiments, well, that clinic sadly went on until like 9-10 years ago. I mean, it was not closed down that long ago. I mean,
Right.
the Canadians kept it open. Now, Cameron was born in Scotland in 1901. He had a degree in psychological medicine, like my father. I was myself directly linked to these experiments because my father worked and experimented for MK Ultra in Paris during the 1960s. And so he told me a lot about these experiments that he conducted, the way they were using certain substances once the LSD would become too strong. And there was a group of psychiatrists, of doctors who were basically conducting these experiments in Paris at the time. Now, we know a few things about the experiments, of course, conducted by Cameron in Canada. We know a few things about all the experiments conducted here in the US, including in Fort Detrick and other places. But we don't really know much about the experiments of MK Ultra in France.
Have you read this one? The 1951 Pont Mass Esprit mass poisoning for a long time was assumed to be ergo poisoning, but now with the CIA Freedom of Information Act, it's found that the CIA actually was putting LSD into ergo, and they poisoned some 250 people with LSD in large doses just to see what.
Like I told you, my father, Dr. Elliot Zagami, had a direct experience. I mean, he was in Paris for a couple of years participating to these experiments. And on top of that, he then went to Switzerland and worked for Mayer, who was the direct, let's say, appointed by Carl Gustav Jung to conduct the Jung Institute in Zurich. And so the whole project of mind control and connected also, of course, to the infamous Tavistock Institute that prior to 1947 was known as the Tavistock Clinic, was something that in the end disgusted my father to the extent of leaving psychiatry altogether in the middle of the 1970s, because he disliked the political abuse of psychiatry that was conducted also in the Western world and not only in the Soviet Union. And so that was, of course, the experience that my father had, a medical professional, somebody who was held in high regards by Mayer, who personally came to visit him in the middle of the 70s in Rome. And he said, sorry, I'm no longer interested in participating with this whole show. I don't no longer believe that we are really ethically and morally
when you poison 250 Frenchmen, like I'm talking like 6-year-old kids, babies, mothers, old men on the street with their like baguette, like you put 200, like an entire town of Catholics that are almost medieval period. They've never experienced modern world, and you just drug them like that. I mean, I can imagine how it would take away the ethics of a man if he didn't realize some other government is in some other country using some other guy.
You see, that was quite incredible because up until the second phase of MK Ultra with Operation Midnight Climax, here in the US, we didn't have experiments on unwilling citizens, but they could still do them abroad.
They could also accidentally, like Climax was like, well, if they go to a strip club, I mean, who cares?
Well, but that was the moment in which they decided also to conduct experiments on unwilling citizens of the United States of America. I mean, there were laws that were protecting from 1948 with basically a law that has only been amended in 2012, the Smith-Mundt Reformation Act of 2012. But from 1948, Truman was wanting to pass that law 1 year before NATO kicked off, because we here in the United States were then privileged with being the only country protected by a law. And that's why, like I said, also Cameron's experiments were done in Canada. And then there was always this plausible deniability used also by the FBI and the CIA when it came down to all the various experiments conducted here in the United States of America that transformed the city like San Francisco in a laboratory that gave results. I mean, we saw the summer the flower power experiment, that was a result of this experiment.
That's true.
I think that we can also say that Anton LaVey's 1966 Church of Satan was a product of MK Ultra.
Oh, and of its time. And of its time. I mean, imagine you're a criminologist working with the police department, and look what the whole look what they're doing in that town.
But also, you have to remember, like I explained in my book, because, you know, then you have in 1968, of course, at the premiere of Rosemary's Baby in San Francisco, the great meeting between LaVey and Michael Aquino that will, of course, then carry on and produce what eventually in the middle of the 70s will become the Temple of Set. But regardless of that, I think that really MK Ultra and all the experiments that were conducted in that city created the basis for the present crisis that we have today in San Francisco. I mean, today we have a mental health crisis in San Francisco, a drug problem in San Francisco, and nobody still seems to connect it to those hideous experiments that were instead carried on back in those days. Because, of course, in my book, I want to make it clear, I don't base my book on fiction or on urban legends.
Right.
MK Ultra will eventually become a urban legend in the age of the internet, and everything will be MK Ultra. You know, that artist is MK Ultra, this actor is this. But in reality, MK Ultra, formally speaking, ended in 1973. And what came after were other operations, equally important and equally, of course, terrible for those that were inflicted upon this. But at the time, there were also the need, Michael Aquino said, to transform psychological warfare in something different. And that was really from the moment the whole MK Ultra thing was kind of put aside. Then the research grown, especially in the military field, and they came up with this mind war. With the rising of the internet in the 1980s, the mind war received an entirely unexpected and somewhat comic resurrection, Aquino said. But it's also true that there was a Orwellian blueprint for Manchurian candidate mind control and world domination in MK Ultra. But these experiments, did they actually result in something that worked? Well, when they work, those experiments, it's like once it works, it doesn't stay as an exclusivity of the CIA. It's not like they have, you know, the exclusive, we have branded this and now we have our own mind control. No, it doesn't work like that. Once they invented certain things through these hideous experiments, then they became in use from other organizations outside of the CIA, cults, rather than transnational organizations, non-state actors, all kinds of people could then access to that experience and make it their own.
But let's look at this for just a quick second. So earlier you mentioned psychic driving, right? Because Donald, you and Cameron does this thing, and everyone's like, look how horrible this guy is. He'll play the same message over and over again. It's called psychic driving. We have a tape that just plays the same message for days and days and days. And now to CNN. You get it? Because what did CNN do as soon as we get to a publication of this psychic driving? Oh, Tanya Harding. Oh, the Desert Storm War. 24-hour-a-day coverage. Oh, we're looping the coverage. The idea of psychic driving being part of the way the news and media is sent to you. It's very much everywhere all the time. But
Absolutely, but that's it. Michael Aquino had discovered a more subtle way of bypassing the rules that protected from psychological operation the American public by creating these more subtle forms of mind war, like he coined this term, which I think is very appropriate. And of course, here is not about whoever says Michael Aquino is the conclusive evidence and proof that there is black magic in the Pentagon everywhere. This is not part of what we are discussing here. Here we are discussing the fact that Michael Aquino's work became, because of its importance in the non-lethal, non-injurious, and non-destructive way of conducting mind control, while instead MK Ultra, well, aside from Frank Olson, who was thrown out of the window, probably killed a lot of other people. Okay, so Michael Aquino said we shouldn't kill people. We shouldn't really be so invasive. That's why he was against that kind of form of mind control, and he was instead, like you said, on more soft. Can we say is more soft, because they are still, I mean, in the end, the result
manipulation. You want to manipulate people to move directions.
Yeah, in the end, it's always about manipulation, and it's about manipulation, and of course, targeted audiences that now, through the reformation of the Smith-Mundt Act of 2012, which was done under Obama, with the excuse that Al-Qaeda and ISIS were targeting the Arab minorities of the United States and all this BS, while instead they want to target now, and they have the possibility, they want in a much more easy way also American citizens. However, it kind of backfired, because a couple of journalists from the USA Today then made a case out of it, saying that they were inflicted a psyop here in the United States. And so it's not, I mean, when we go and study the amendment to the original law of 1948, we see it's an amendment. And so if we are legally capable and understanding of these things, and we are inflicted a psyop here in the United States, we can still legally probably react and have our way through the courts. So this, of course, we have to have ample evidence, because then I see a lot of people that just wake up one morning and start going on the internet. I've been mind controlled. I'm a victim of MKO and all this BS that doesn't have any substance. Okay, we need to.
Well, how far do you take that? Because I agree with you that MK Ultra is not off. Yeah, exactly.
From a psyop,
I think most people seem kind of manipulated. They seem kind of driven by other things in their choices.
That's why my book defies the difference between mind control and brainwashing. These two things are different. Okay. Brainwashing is inflicted. I pick you up, I bring you to a lab and I start treating you like a guinea pig. That and I brainwash you. That is brainwashing. If I do mind control on you using the media, using the internet, using this and that, is not really still considered to the full extent brainwashing, because brainwashing is a term that came into being after the Second World War by a journalist who himself took the term from an ancient Chinese term, because it was claimed that the Chinese, the Russians, during the Korean War were starting to brainwash POWs and soldiers, and that, of course, then was presented wonderfully in the Manchurian Candidate of 1962. So, I mean, that is like the way. Regarding instead what happens with mind war is about the ethical dimension of psychological operations, because up until 2012, they had to find ways of, like, for example, when they found the way of inflicting upon the US the biggest psyop regarding the weapon of mass destruction that allegedly Saddam Hussein had. He didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, but through the Italian SISMI, the Italian military intelligence, then they got this information, which was a psyop, into the American public. With the plausible deniability, they could say, oh, but the mistake was done by the Italians and SISMI. We didn't do it, and it's not our psyop, it's their psyop. Oh well. That was because since 1948, every time there was a need for a psyop, who did they use? They used their allies from NATO who were not protected by the law.
Yeah. And it looks more legitimate, because what helps a psyop is corroboration. Well, now you have new, and so when the president's reading something that the Italians had in their newspaper that Dick Cheney sent through the CIA for them to, I mean, it's perfect, right? Like, you'd believe that.
No, it was like a proper intelligence report made by the media intelligence, and when I think it was Colin Powell in front of the whole of the United Nations presenting this very seriously, because you have to be serious when you seriously bullshit the whole of the world into getting into a hideous war and killing hundreds of thousands of your soldiers. I mean, the so-called psychology of victory that was used during the Iraqi war. But I mean, let's not forget also another groundbreaking document, the mental battlefield of John B. Alexander. That is another turning point in the history of mind control, because we know that psychotronics and then, of course, Stapledine and all those people got fixated with the possibility of merging elements of the paranormal. And so the man who stares at goat, the legend about the sergeant who in Fort Bragg used to go in front of these goats, and with the power of the mind, he will stop their heart, And that, of course, is true. It was like this fixation, this mental battlefield didn't end up with MK Ultra. That's why my book is based on facts, not speculations and very detailed facts. Like when I say that John Alexander changed the history of mind control with his article that came out on Military Review in 1980. It was an article that coincided more or less with also the paper that Aquino had published, but focused very much on the complexity of the battlefield with the possibility of using psychotronics or bioenergetics and bioenergetics, and of course then, like Aquino, they started to be fixated on magnetic fields, and those magnetic fields ultimately will produce the technology which now has been announced in July of this year, which is absolutely mind-blowing, because now, thanks to the AI, they can do all the things that these people were trying to do back then with the use of drugs, can be easily instead conducted without the use of drugs and technology and the AI. But this paper that you're showing regarding the new mental battlefield, it's very important. Now, I don't know if you picked up the right number of Military Review, because the number which the article that at the time, it was called The New Mental Battlefield, and it had this subtitle, I remember, it was Beam Me Up, Spock. I mean, these people were all very much fixated with Star Trek. Did you see also when Michael Aquino ended up on Oprah Winfrey in the 80s, this fixation with...
Absolutely.
With Star Trek.
You know why, right?
They were all space cadets.
It's pretty reasonable, because Star Trek is space fascism, but it's from the perspective. It's like a propaganda made by. It's like Starship Troopers. It's a propaganda made by woke fascism. So it's secularized fascism is very different, because when they're somebody who wants to be fascist, you're like, well, that's a weird minority. But when they're the state itself, they're the good guys. But what's good about Star Trek? What do? They spy on people. They're a military police state. Their espionage requires people to not know that they're spying on them. Star Trek is it's military fascism in space. Of course they love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I couldn't have said it better. Regarding why they went into this new mental battlefield, we always see that, like in the case of MK Ultra, which was based on the fact that these experiments had been conducted during the Second World War already by the Nazis, and then the Soviets were working on them, so they had to do the same thing. We can say that equally in the 1970s, after the end of MK Ultra, still the Soviets were working very much with the paranormal. It was generally believed that the Soviets and their allies were well leading the parapsychological research, like also in practices like remote viewing, for example, just to give you one.
We found it. Beam me up, Spock, right there.
That's it. That is I think this is an historic number of Military Review that I cite in my book, and I think everybody should read, because you will find a lot of interesting stuff in this. You will find really that they were verifying what the Soviets were doing, and you can in fact go on page 48 of Military Review of what you have shown me, and you can see a list of the existence of various telepathic or energy emanations from the body that were discussed in all this. And that eventually will bring, years later, when Michael Aquino published the book Mind War, he really there defines it even better, because he says we are understanding the Homo electromagneticus, the man who is electromagnetic, who emanates these magnetic fields. And so if we then emanate fields on him, we will have a reaction in his mind. The problem here is that up until they could map completely the brain, they couldn't really act with absolute precision. However, when it comes to
great direction to like research, yeah.
But what happened then with recently with the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump, I explain in my book, they erased all evidence already 10 days after, when they cremated the body of Thomas Crooks. And this cremation was actually conducted 10 days after the cremation of Kerr Ritual, which was conducted parallel
oh my
to
God,
the assassination.
I never thought about that before, but no, I'm not saying I believe this. I'm just saying it's possible. If someone were to, all right, Trump turned his head.
Andreas,
okay,
the husband of Nancy Pelosi is a senior member of the Bohemian Club, and he was conducting the ritual this year. I have here the invite which I published in the book. This is the invite of this year, and they do it always in a very cinematic way. In fact, this year they had actually Jack Myers as a director.
Really, Jack Myers did it? That's
so the thing is that while they were doing that, they were also doing something else. And you know that each encampment in the grove has a specific characteristic, and the encampment that is more powerful is the military-industrial complex one. So once you are in an encampment full of bohemians that are all in the military-industrial complex, and they are conducting a ritual, and during that ritual, you actually have the attempted shooting of a president. Well, I mean,
you ever gotten the meat plate at the grill?
Yeah, no, but the synchronicity is a little bit too. So, I mean, they would have probably.
I imagine though, if Trump was, if someone's gonna try to, I'm just realizing though, if someone's gonna try to shoot at somebody and they're like, "Oh, it's a miracle he turned his head so quickly." Well, you can do that with radio. You know, you can.
No. The thing is, I don't believe that Trump. I think really Trump was saved by an act of God. I think that Trump will have become another victim in the long list of lone gunmen, like started with Lee Harvey Oswald, and then you have many others that follow. Now, the actual making of a Manchurian candidate was possible already back in the days of JFK. Imagine today in 2024. I mean, the guy was probably... The difference, which I explain in my book, is that Lee Harvey Oswald was a volunteer in MK Ultra when he was in Japan. And there is a difference here, because Thomas Crooks was a volunteer in his Black Rock spot and already was. But Thomas Crooks.
I mean, the big time FBI probe, the fact that he has these crazy big lawyers, the father does, is also very.
But the father also and the mother, who are both therapeutes, they're both expert in psychology. They have studied psychology for their own business, because that is what they do for their own. I mean, you
really want this guy as your psychologist telling you how to live your life better?
No, but
that's his dad.
No, I want to tell you something about this image. No, go back to that image of the father. Because I want to tell you something about this image. Now, this image was done on the 23rd of July.
23rd, eh?
The day his son was cremated, he went out to the supermarket and bought all this shit. Now, if your son is cremated, and you care about your son, will you go out to the supermarket that day?
God, right? It's ridiculous. How hungry is this guy?
There is only 2 videos of the parents, and nobody has ever confirmed that under the mask that is the mother, but many, of course, have speculated, and apparently it is the mother. The fact is that these 2 people, they are professionals of the mental health professionals. And you want to tell me that a mental health professional doesn't understand if their son is sick? And actually, the father gave his the gun used for the attempted assassination and the killing of Imperatore, the year before, it was transferred from him to the son. The same thing happened with the father of the guy who just conducted the mass shooting in the school. But on the contrary of because this guy is a libtard with a lot of connections in the Democrat Party, both him and his wife, he's untouched. While instead, the guy who is the father of that recent shooting,
Thomas Crooks.
No, the recent. I'm talking about what happened a couple of days ago. What happened?
Oh, the Chicago thing. Yeah.
Well, father did the same thing. Last year, he gave his he invested the gun to. He gave the gun to his son. Now, the difference is that the father and son appear in court, but the other guy has never appeared in court. He gets away with his son's murder, even after giving him the gun that killed the guy from the fire brigade and attempted to kill Trump. So there is a different standard here.
Yeah.
There is like two standards. Very weird and
ridiculous.
So
that really points it out for you. It's like it tells you something about both situations.
No, but it also tells you something that these parents, and the incredible thing about this recent school shooting, and I talk about mass shootings in my book because they started when they launched Prozac and all the other antidepressants. So the rise of mass shootings goes with the big pharma antidepressants. It's kind of like one and the other.
Correlation doesn't equal causality. YouTube censors, but yeah, keep going.
And it's like the beginning of MK Ultra coincides with the discovery of the first two antidepressants in history.
Super weird, right? Who could?
It's a wild synchronicity. But in any case, the fact that this guy who basically had been stopped and interrogated by the FBI together with his son, a few months later says to the son, "You can have the gun." I mean, come on, guys. I mean, it's insane.
Right.
Of course, it's different from Thomas Crook's parents, who are even mental health professionals, which makes it even worse.
Right.
Because
they should know. They have to know.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it's better that you hang your mental health professional thing.
Or at least don't have a gun. Like, don't give a gun to your kid. If you know that this guy, it's your son, you've lived with him all your life, and you've got qualifications to tell you someone's crazy, and you get him a gun, you know?
It's just like insane. And unfortunately, the former fire chief Corin Imperatore lost his life. People were wounded. People were traumatized. Many people will be traumatized forever for what happened that day.
I disagree, Memory Man. I think you haven't seen a conductor with an orchestra. It's very synchronistic.
I also want to remind people what MK Ultra means, because people talk about it, but they don't talk. Manufacturing, killers, utilizing lethal tradecraft requiring assassination. It's not just like it's something a little bit deeper. And like I said, MK Ultra formally doesn't exist anymore, but the products of MK Ultra exist. It's like when we say, okay, we no longer have Atari video games. We still have video games. We don't have Atari, maybe as big as it used to be.
I would even nuance it more. I would say that MK Ultra had a very specific goal of turning people into effective agents that could be used and utilized for missions or for operations. I don't think all mind control is for that anymore. I think that with the urge of drugs and 24-hour cable, pacification is at least as big of a thing. They want to pacify as maybe more people than they want to make into agents. MK Ultra is a privilege.
MK Ultra is a past thing. The new thing is about inflicting the masses more and more forms of mind control that basically numb them and create idiots.
It's not MK Ultra. MK Ultra was like enhance, be a soldier, be able to memorize things.
It was, but it was still terrible, and terrible things were done. And it produced probably also the dark side of the age of Aquarius and the flower power.
But terrible things were done to Italian boys who became amazing opera singers. I mean, you know, terrible things are done to children to make them into great things. That was probably what the CIA's whole, they're like, we're going to turn them into something great, which is not the goal. Which is not the goal today.
My grandfather, Henry Lyon Young, wrote a book called Castrato based on that. So, I mean, but going back to the actual, I would say that there's a lot of comparisons that we can make between Lee Harvey Oswald and what happened with Thomas Crooks. Like I said, Lee Harvey Oswald was probably more aware of what he was doing because he actually embraced MK Ultra experiments. He actually went to Russia. And then, while instead Thomas Crooks looks like the typical victim of a psyop, of a very complex psyop. And of course, he was also, before he went on his rampage, he was actually communicated with somebody. We know that there were some encrypted communications and stuff that will probably never be released to the public. We know that, of course, the deep state, meaning the FBI, the Secret Service, and of course the Homeland Security, which with a webinar conducts the extraction for, I mean, that's ridiculous to prepare the agents for the day with a webinar that doesn't even work out. All these things are because they wanted Trump dead. And this is the truth. I mean, they wanted Donald J. Trump dead. And that's why Donald J. Trump, 2 hours after the attempted assassination, called RFK Jr., who was himself, his father, the victim of a mind-controlled subject.
It's interesting to see a fumble, right? Because we're so used to seeing Mission Impossible TV shows where the mission just goes off flawlessly.
Somebody say, who wanted Trump dead? Guys, I mean, how can you even question who wanted? I mean, the list goes from here to Washington, guys. I mean, please give me a break. I mean, we're supposed to be intelligent people here in the chat. Now, who wanted Trump dead? I can give you a list. Like I said, I could write probably a 10,000 pages book.
I could do it too.
With the list. But I would say that mainly the military industrial complex and NATO. NATO, which has started a new thing called cognitive warfare, which goes even beyond psychological operations and has a base here in the United States of America. I talk about this in my new book. Cognitive warfare is actually conducted here in U.S. territory by a former French officer. And cognitive warfare is structural and considered an approach to target the human's cognition of individuals, groups, and societies in a way that affects the decision-making processes and ultimately their behavior. While cognitive effects are not measurable in a typical sense, we can say, they do affect how we think, what we feel, and how we act using brain-centered technologies that aim to destabilize us. So that's what basically happened with Thomas Crooks. And it's very important, the reasoning that we have in the Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, which is NATO's founding document. It establishes a principle of resilience, they call it. And they say that basically Article 3 includes supporting the continuity of government and the provision of essential services. They are the ones in charge, not the US, but this alliance, which is transnational. So I think that it's a priority for us to understand that this cognitive warfare that NATO is inflicting upon all the members of NATO.
And Pepsi, like you think about corporatism, because you've got Rockefeller lead, which creates, 1959 at their first bridge to the Soviet Union.
Why don't you go and Google Cognitive Warfare Allied Command Transformation, which is their center here in the US.
Cognitive warfare.
It's called the headquarters of Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, HQ SACT is the acronym. And this is where the development of cognitive warfare and the concept of cognitive warfare has been developed since very recently, 2021. So we are talking about the most recent development in mind war. Let's not forget that Michael Aquino in the 80s not only went...
Is this right?
Yes, this is the base. It's in Norfolk, Virginia. Okay. And if people want to know more about it, they can go and study these documents, and they can maybe learn about the way they are manipulating now our population, because our population needs to be controlled and protected from the disinformation of Russia, of course, China. These are the main enemies. And I mean, I'm not saying that China and Russia doesn't have the interest to brainwash our population, and they probably already do, especially China with TikTok. It's a complete cognitive warfare weapon, TikTok.
But we're also heading towards a multipolar world, right? We used to be almost in the early 2000s, late 90s. Everyone spoke English, watched American television. It's like the most effective universal mind control period. All of a sudden, we're dividing up into demographics. There's people speaking different languages on different server routes. I mean, and BRICS has no access to Twitter or X. We're basically at a point where there's one West and another East, and we're going to have separate mind controls, separate culture, separate demographics, right?
Somebody is rightly saying cognitive warfare incorporates also time biological, neurogenetic warfare, of course, but there is an additional reason why NATO is developing a concept for cognitive warfare. A cognitive attack directly targets the minds of civilians. And that is important because we are not talking about militaries. We're not talking about psyops, which are usually inflicted on military. From the time of Sun Tzu, we have psy warriors sent ahead of the combat to inflict this mind control on the population that was so scared, or maybe would be given this information on purpose. Genghis Khan was a master. Genghis Khan will send ahead his Psy warriors, and they will terrorize entire towns or even states, regions, and they will say, the guy's about to arrive. He's going to rape your daughters. He's going to eat your heart. He's fearless. He has 1 million soldiers with him. The guy arrived maybe with 10,000 soldiers, and then he positioned them in different ways like an illusionist with cards, and then everybody was like, Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan, by doing that, he conquered basically half of this planet. So it worked out for him. But like I said, the target the minds of civilians. And this is a violation, in a way, of the law of armed conflict, but it is, unlike psychological operation, cognitive activities are not directed at our conscious mind, but at our subconscious mind, which is the main drivers of our behavior, our emotions. So it's a little bit more, it's much more difficult. It's about sensation, it's about a feeling. Cognitive warfare is about a feeling. It sounds like, I'm talking about some music here, some good music. It's about a feeling. Well, yeah, it is about a feeling. And even music can be used, of course.
But yeah, it is. That's a great example, because if you latch onto a feeling of something, then you like it. I mean, hypnosis works better at the circus when you go along with it, right? That's the thing, when you're voluntarily.
Yeah, no. And so the psychological operations are directed externally. But when you talk about the emotion, this takes us to a place, a different place in the mind control, because it's through hyper-personalized targeting. And that's what they did with Thomas Crooks. They did hyper-personalized targeting, and they exploit neuroscience, biotechnology, information, and of course, in cognitive techniques, also using social media, artificial intelligence, digital networks for neuroprofiling and targeting the individuals. I mean, a variety. They can actually access your DNA, 23andMe or whatever, and go through the history of your whole bloodline and see, well, there is a tendency in this bloodline to do this or that. So, I mean, this is the future of mind control, which I've been talking about in my new book. And it's, I think, groundbreaking, because here we are at a crossroads in which we are about to lose our freedom of thought, our own will is under attack because we might lose our will. And I wanted to really do this book because I want to offer the possibility to people to understand how they can still keep their brains clear from a satanic infestation. Because you see, in the Bible it says very clearly, Satan can't read our minds, only God. God knows everything, Satan doesn't. But the moment in which you put a mind control, a brain-computer interface, a chip, anything, well, then
Giving them a translator, yeah.
The moment that they can actually read our thoughts simply by watching with the algorithms, our face, and the way we act, well, that is basically giving the devil the possibility of entering your mind.
I've been major concerned about this as well because, growing up in America, we have Thomas Hobbes and everybody loves John Locke. I don't really like John Locke so much because he's like, you can have this right and that privilege. But Thomas Hobbes says you have one right, perhaps, which is the right to try not to submit to authority until you die, right? You can get killed refusing to submit to authority. But like, as you just said, that one right we have might very quickly disappear. With this kind of power of suggestion, and not just mind control, but as you've mentioned, body control, because they understand everything.
When it comes to cognitive attacks, they seem to always remain below the threshold of armed conflict. The effects can be lethal and multi-domain. They affect all the 5 domains of warfare, because that's how we know them. Furthermore, though, these attacks are people-centric. And meaning they have human cognition as the center of gravity. And in principle, that is a continuous, never-ending battle. Although not proven to be a cognitive attack, we have also the so-called Havana syndrome, which I also talk about in my book, which is this cluster of adverse symptoms that have been reported. But China is globally one of the leading nations in the scientific development of such capabilities in cognitive warfare. Within the context of the Chinese free warfare strategy, an integrated people-centered psychological and legal approach, the Chinese have developed a database with the profiles of more than 2 million prominent individuals worldwide that they may use to influence decision-making processes with their AI capabilities, which in 2030 will give birth to what we generally call Cyber Satan, which I have dedicated, as you know, 3 books, volume 6.66, volume 7, and volume 9. So I thank you so much, because we always seem to have very interesting conversation. I wish I had more time, Andreas.
This is amazing stuff. We'll have to come back again soon. I appreciate that you're back again with this. I want to harp on this line I read in your Under the Beam Me Up Spock, where it says psychotronics may be described as the interaction of the mind and matter. And I think that is really what you're saying here is the final culmination or apex point of soul, mind, and body control through this electromagnetic understanding of us.
It is about altering our perception of reality, deceiving our brain in order to affect our decision making, but it's also, of course, about the mind as now my book starts with also a description of the revolutionary work conducted by Franz Anton mesmerism, animal magnetism. And we went from calling it animal magnetism into calling it hypnosis. But in 2024, we might be more understanding of what the Illuminati, and Franz Mesmer was a close friend of the Weishaupt family, both the son and the father, wanted to, when it comes to animal magnetism, people think about something that, yes, became hypnotism, but still
more carnal. It's like how to pick up a chick is with animal magnetism.
But in reality, with the latest magnetic field inventions, discoveries, what Mesmer was proposing is still not only innovative, it's actually revolutionary even to this day. I mean,
it's mesmerizing.
It's mesmerizing, yeah. And we know that at the time we had of course, this big conflict between him and Count Cagliostro, another big figure of the Illuminati, by the way, a member of my family, Giuseppe Balsamo. And he was another guy who hypnotizes. In fact, in my book, I mentioned and cited that incredible interpretation by Orson Welles, which in that movie from, I think it was 1949, I don't remember that, the movie that really has this image of with the compass and the square and Orson Welles. And this is like, 1949, Black Magic. If you can find it on the internet, it's a great movie. And it's a movie in which Orson Welles really hypnotized. Now, the difference between Orson Welles, that of course, in that movie also we have, because it's based on a book, which also carries the conflict and the image of Mesmer. There was a difference between Mesmer and Cagliostro. Mesmer was a doctor, okay? And Mesmer, though, was using this animal magnetism and this form of hypnotism by surrounding himself also of objects that could in some way drag the attention of the person. So we can say that Cagliostro instead was a traditional hypnotist, because he uses only his eyes. And that's what Orson Welles is really great in interpreting, the fact that he watches with your eyes and he hypnotizes. And there is a scene in that movie which I suggest you watch, because at one point he goes in front of the King and Queen of France and he says, because they were laughing to him, they were joking about it, they were making a joke, Cagliostro, ha ha ha. There were these people who had pretended to be some desperados, and they say, "Can you save us, Cagliostro?" And they were pretending. So then once they came out, once they made a mockery of Cagliostro, saying, "Well, we are not sick at all, you're a joke." But Cagliostro then says, "Like I can give, I can take." And at that point, he hypnotizes them, and they are petrified and terrorized because this guy had an enormous animal magnetism. That's the thing. Anton LaVey was chosen for his Church of Satan charade, we can say, because he had enormous animal magnetism. This guy was actually involved in a circus with animals. The guy was very powerful. Magnetically speaking, he had a lot of power. And regardless of what his beliefs was, he was charismatic. He was the guy who could go and in a room and command a whole, everybody would be like, whoa. And that doesn't happen with everybody, you see. It happens with people who have a strong animal magnetism, which Aquino then says the homo electromagneticus means that they have more magnetism than others. So
you
when
can tune it up. You can do Kundalini and stuff, and you can become more intense that way.
You can build up that magnetism. That is basically what a lot of occultists have attempted. A lot of people have attempted since the time of to build up this magnetism, but it's not easy. Instead, you have people who are born with that magnetism. From the moment they are like in front of you, coming out of the womb of the mother, they are like
Herculean.
Whoa, who is this guy? Because and I tell you, in my life, very few times I met people with this kind of force. But when I met them, I knew where I was. And there was once an episode that happened with me in Cairo, in Egypt, where at the entrance of Khan Khalili, which is an area of Cairo, where there is this old mosque that are abandoned, very important. I want to go and visit. I was in the middle of Ramadan, and I was there courtesy of the Butrus Gali family, that Butrus, the former Secretary General, was a member of course. And they were a powerful family because they're also the protectors of the Coptic Church. And they told me, Leo, at the entrance of Khan Khalili, if you go at night, there is a guy who commands all spirits, all genies. You don't want to look him in his eyes. Don't look him in his eyes when you enter that. Of course, I had to look in his eyes because if you tell me something. But I tell you, man, I remember going through the road walking. You know, I knew that the guy was my friend who was with me, Paul Bebralovich, said to me, the guy's coming up. Don't watch him. Just go straight. Just pretend he's not there. And I go, then I said, screw that. I want to see this guy. And I see him. And the moment I see him, I felt I was losing it. I was projected into another. I was like, I was like, this guy can literally do anything with the human being, because I'm watching it just for a few seconds and felt that thing. And I was like, okay. I made myself the sign of the cross. The guy, you know what he did? He smiled at me. And I was like, whoa.
It just disoriented your like ability to like sort out reality, like the frequencies.
That's
and,
the
like,
kind of guy that if you bring, I don't know, in some kind of variety show in Las Vegas, he could just like throw asleep a guy just by putting him like this, touching him. You know, boom, boom.
But you know, that's the thing. Like, they don't like to do parlor tricks, but they're also like, don't stare at me with the eyes. Don't give me an opportunity. Don't give me a chance. Because like, if I could, I would. But I got to be good. You know.
Well, thank you so much, Andres. I hope we can talk sooner, because we always have some great chats.
I want everyone to go to buy your book. And hey, Leo priced this so you can buy 3 and give a couple to your friends. I mean,
absolutely.
And also you can go hard on Kindle too, but go for paperback, because these are something, you know, you're gonna want the government to like look through your house and find these someday and know that you had them. You know what I mean? Like,
you see, back in the days of the Monte Carlo Lodge, we had published a book called Universal Unity, me and Ezio Giunchiglia. And I remember there was a raid upon the flat of a guy, a Jewish guy from Tel Aviv in Norway, who was a friend of mine. And I had given him this book. Well, during the raid, one of the few things they took was actually the book.
Of course, yeah. They're like, well, that looks pretty suspicious.
And so he called me after. He was, Leo, I got traded. You know, they were probably here because I don't know. It was probably about drugs or something. You know, some guy from a club who had come to his house and some bullshit like this. But when they saw this book, they took it, man. They took it. They took it, and I never saw it again. I had to give them another copy back.
I don't blame. I'm sure that the police enjoyed reading that one. So, Leo, thank you for being here. We'll do it again soon. Bless you, man.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarian.